Malone at the parade when the Denver Nuggets won the championship. He had a famous quote. Let's see if we can find it here. Here we go.
He came into this world.
So let's get it back so I can show it to y'all. All right, so this is the Who's Your Daddy. This is the basis of where we got this from.
He came into this world as the son of a coach, but in these playoffs, he became the Lakers' daddy. So I tell you what, NBA, put that in your pipe and smoke it.
All right, so that was the famous thing that happened at the Denver Nuggets championship parade for their 2023 NBA championship. And it was a weird thing that year they played us in the first round, I believe. They beat us in the first round and they went on to win the championship. So it's kind of funny that, they were talking about the Lakers a couple rounds later as they end up winning. So that was just kind of weird. So that was the funny quote that came from that. Who's your daddy? Now we've been seeing some things that have been happening with these NBA coaches. Mike Malone was fired with just 3 games left in the season. The Denver Nuggets were in the fourth. They were in the 4th seed to go to the playoffs, and seemingly Jokic having one of the best seasons ever as a center. He actually is the first center to average a triple double for an entire season. So it's one of those situations where you just kind of find it strange that they end up firing their coach. And as more reports came out, I guess Mike Malone and Calvin Booth, the GM of the Denver Nuggets, they were kind of going back and forth on how they wanted to play players. And, Mike Malone wanted to be able to play vets. They weren't signing vets. After they won their championship, they end up losing Caldwell Pope. They end up losing Mike Brown. So they lost some players who were really good for them off the bench and kind of kept things afloat. They wanted to go and play younger players who would cost less and just kind of re-up with keeping guys around Jokic, and they thought that would work. So far it hasn't worked. We'll see how things go this year in the playoffs, but they will be without Calvin Booth and they'll also be without Mike Malone, who was suddenly fired. So the reports are that things came to a head where they were going back and forth, and basically what I think, well, actually, let me tell you what the report is. The report is the owner was sick of it going back and forth, and this was the last-ditch effort to see if they can get something out of this season. So we just say, you know what? I'm not gonna pick between y'all two. I'm just going to get rid of both of you, and hopefully this can give us a jolt going into the playoffs, and we'll see what happens. And then also it's reported that the owner stated that winning would have kind of made things worse. So if they've already decided they're going to fire Mike Malone, if they would have went on a live or a long playoff run, then it would have been hard to fire him after a long playoff run. So since that happened, he was like, look, we're just going to get rid of both of you. I think this is a non-decision because when it comes to running a team, running a business, you have to make a decision on, who you believe in more and decide and go forward from there. So if you decided that, we're going to get rid of him, why wasn't this decision made earlier in the year so you can actually give the team a chance this year? Doing this 3 games before the playoffs is going to be a lot of things weighing on the players going into the playoffs. I just don't think you're actually setting your team up for success. You have to make clear decisions when you're presented with the information and, move forward from there. To me, if Calvin Booth, you weren't going to bring him back, he's the GM, no more moves can happen this late in the year. Let Calvin Booth go, keep the coach, let him finish out, and regardless of what happens, you let him go. This actually happened with the Chicago Bulls, which is the reason why Michael Jordan ended up retiring in 1998. It was reported that it didn't matter if they went on to win a championship, they were not re-signing Phil Jackson. Michael Jordan said, well, if you don't re-sign Phil, I won't be back. They said, it doesn't matter. You win a championship, we still not bringing Phil back. They won a championship, they didn't bring Phil back. They moved on from him after the year. And I think that was something similar. They could have used this opportunity to move on from Mike Malone after the year, after it happened. That would be making a decision and believing in your decision and not going based on perception of how things went to make your decision. So the owner coming out and saying, or the ownership group coming out and saying, hey, if he would have won, would have had more pressure to keep him. Make a decision, face the pressure. And if you didn't believe he could, do anything further for your team, let him go at that point. But for him to be the winningest coach in Denver Nuggets history, and for you to fire him three games before the postseason, I think that's a classless move. And they should have fired him after the season or early in the season, so you make the decision. But to do it 3 games before the playoffs is ridiculous. We also saw Taylor Jenkins. We saw him get fired a couple weeks before the playoffs. And at the time, the Memphis Grizzlies, they were on, I believe, a 4-game losing streak, but they were headed in the right direction, still potential to make the playoffs. It's been reported afterwards that they got rid of all his assistants. They picked a whole new group of assistants that he had to work with, and then they also changed the offense to a new offense based on what the assistants wanted to run, and those assistants end up installing the offense. So at that point, they just weren't working together anymore. One thing I've learned with head coaches, one thing they want the power over is to choose their group of coaches that work with them. You want to choose people who kind of view things, some view it just like you, some view it differently, so you can kind of have that mind melt on how you should handle things. And then you also want different various levels of experience because they kind of see the game differently, and then also the different ways that they actually relate to the players. So, I think it's a disservice to these coaches who have done so much for these franchises for them to let them go so late in the season. And then also, if you don't trust him to hire his own staff, why is he there? This is where you are not making the full decision. Make the full decision. If you can't choose a staff, then we don't believe in you anymore. Make the decision at that moment. Make it a clean break. Do it in the off season. Then you give your chance a better chance going into the next season. But to do these things, these 2 moves in particular, so late into the year, you basically are torpedoing this team's chances going into the playoffs. You're torpedoing it. And to me, that's a disservice to the fans. To say you care about the fans and to make these decisions like this, you can't care about the fans because you're putting too much pressure on these players going into the playoffs when they're only focused. The only questions they should be talking about is the playoffs. So this is a case of, we always talk about decision making and making good decisions. And this is a case where I believe these 2 organizations made bad decisions, because if it was reported that, they got rid of all Taylor Jenkins' assistants and his staff, you should have got rid of Taylor Jenkins at that moment because you no longer believed in him. That was your decision to not believe in him and to create his own staff. So that's the point you should have let him go. Mike Malone, you didn't re-sign Calvin Booth. You couldn't come to an agreement. They had different philosophies on, players that they wanted to play, and, the Nuggets organization wanted to get below the threshold and not keep paying all these different luxury tax thresholds. So you're going to have some things that kind of just don't work. And when you do that, you have to make a decision. So if you're going to blow this thing up and throw in the grenade this late, do it early. Make the decision early so you give your chance a chance, because otherwise you're just telling the fans that it doesn't matter. And this is very important with how these things are being handled, because eventually we're going to get to the Luka story and Luka going back to Dallas for the first time, and also how decisions were made in that situation. Now, to compare that to Luka, I don't believe the right decision was made, or actually it could be the right decision to trade Luka. I don't believe they got enough for Luka with how they did it. So, I guess I applaud them for making the decision early, but I just believe that they didn't get what they should have got for Luka. Even from the Lakers, they didn't get enough. So that's my stance there. Also, another thing with these coaches being fired, who are you going to turn to when you move on from these coaches? So we got some positions that are going to be open. So, of course, right now, Denver's open. Memphis is open. It's one more coach I believe got fired. I can't remember the name. We got to see what happens with Pop's health. So if you're firing a coach just immediately, you're going to get hired somewhere else. We don't know if Budenholzer is going to last in Phoenix. We're going to see what happens there. So if you're moving on from this coach and your coach will be snapped up, and somebody else might even be willing to fire their coach prematurely to get the coach that you are letting go, you have to look at what are you going to get that's going to be better. Because the problem is, if you build out a roster, you don't want to go over the threshold, and you say, okay, we're going to sign or we're going to go with younger players. The younger players don't produce, and then you have an all-star or actually one of the best players that is in the game right now in Jokic. You don't put the right guys around him, you're wasting his window. So it's just so many layers of how these things are being mismanaged. Also, side note, LeBron, he's my favorite player. But let me say this. Everybody talks about how LeBron needs so much help, and it's always a running meme of all the help that LeBron gets. But now we've heard Steph Curry needs more help. We've heard KD needs more help. We've heard Jokic needs more help. We've heard Jimmy Butler in Miami needed more help. So it's funny how everybody else is okay where you can say they need more help, but let LeBron get, some good players, and people say, oh, he's getting too much help. So just kind of funny, thought I would throw that in there. Kind of crazy how people view those things. If you measure players to the length of, if you measure players based on how people talk about LeBron, none of these players will measure up. So just thought that was funny to throw in there. So let's get this thing moving. That's how I feel about those coaches being let go so late in the year. I feel like it's a disservice to the fans, disservice to the team, and these ownership groups are just kind of throwing the grenade in too early, and they're not going to recover. They're not going to recover this year, and then they're planning going forward, because you got to remember, what coach is going to want to come to you based on how we viewed how you did things with the last coach. So it's some coaches based on principle, they're not going to be in the running for your team. So you always got to remember how you make decisions and how you do it. Everybody respects you if you'd have just made a decision before the year that, we didn't like how we've been doing the past couple of years, and you let a coach go and you move on. But, do it in the off season, but doing it this close to the playoffs, just, I don't see how people can view that and say this is something that we really respect. So